Hello. In previous video, we talked about how to create a single page dash app, correct? And in that video, I said like the next thing should be, we should be learning about how to work with callbacks in dash apps. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about a very basic callback in this video. Then maybe we will move forward to more advanced stuff over there. Okay, so this particular video will be part of this Plotly dash playlist in my channel, so you can refer it from here. So to start with, so if I just show you what we have done previously, so we just created a very simple HTML h1 tag in our page. So basically we are trying to create a polling app, correct? So, and which basically in that h1 tag we are just displaying some message over here. And if I just run this server, so it will show up something like this one over here in our page, correct? So now let us talk about a very basic callback. So what is callback? So if you remember in the initial video when I have introduced the Plotly dash, over there I have briefly talked about the reactive programming, correct? And I have given one example of the Excel where the outputs are basically attached to the inputs. Like whenever the inputs are getting changed, the outputs are automatically getting changed as well, right? So if I just try to say in another way, so let's say if you are displaying some graph in Plotly, or let's say you want to handle something like the button click or something, you need a callback. That means you'll be giving some input to the app and that input will have a corresponding output. So that is basically a callback in Plotly dash. Now in a normal JavaScript, what we do basically, we handle the button click and then write some program inside that, right, inside the button click event. So in Plotly we handle it in different way. We'll handle it in a callback way. Okay, so the callback is actually implemented as a decorator in Plotly dash. So we need to understand the concept of decorator as well. So we'll come back to that particular concept. But first let me try to establish first what I am trying to achieve today. So for that, what I'll do is I'll go to my code. Okay, let me first stop this server, then because it write a lot of code over here. So what I'll do is I will just try to create a simple text box and a simple div here. So my intention is I'll be writing a callback. So whatever I'll be writing in that text box, the div will be automatically updated as well. So that's a very simple callback example we'll take today. So first I'll do is I will just create a div. Inside that div, I will be creating a label and a text box over here. So this is how I will be creating that. HTML dot, so there is a input called div over here. So if you are not sure about this one, always check for the dash documentation. So under dash HTML components, so if you just want to create a div, you just need to use this one over here, HTML dot capital div. Okay, so this is how they have wrapped the div tag over here. And you can give the children's as well the list of components over here, correct? So that is what I will be doing it as well. So inside the div, I will be passing it as an array because I want to create a label and I want to create a text box. The label is very simple. Let's say I'll mention input colon space. Okay, that's my label. And here I need to create a text box. So again, I will be referring my documentation. Now the text box I'll be creating using the dash core components. So in the dash core component, if you see there are a lot of components, I'll be using the input component. And I'll always encourage you to read the documentation because that's the way you can learn. So you will not be remembering everything together. So whenever things are necessary, we'll just try to see in the documentation and try to implement it. Now in the input, if you see it here, like the type of the input you can implement as a text box, or it can hold numbers, password, email, something like this one, range, search. Okay, so as we can enter text, so I'll be using the type as text over here. So to create the input first, I need to implement basically this dash core component. So this is how I will be importing it. Import dash core components as DCC over here. So you can see like from where I found this one. You can see numerous example over here in other inputs as well. So you can check it out from there as well. Okay. So once I implement that, so now I will be creating the input called DCC dot, and the class name is input over here, correct? Input. So in the input, as I said, there are a lot of again parameters we can send it over here, but the most important things are ID. Let's say we will give an ID over here because that will be used later stage. So let's say in ID I will be giving input 1 over here. Okay, and type, as I show you, the type will be text for us because we're just trying to create a text box over here. And there is another parameter called value. Okay, so that will be the default value of that, or basically whatever string you will be giving it over here, that will be that value will be set to that particular text box automatically. Okay, so initially I want some value, so that's why what I'll do is I will go back over here and I will give some value over here as well. value value equals to, let's say I'll give initial value over here. So that's my text box. Now it is complaining over here because in this div, so these are the children of this div, right? So I need to give a comma over here. Okay, so it's an array. So I'll save it. Let us try to run this one and see first how this is getting displayed in the UI. So if I just run this app now, so currently we are running in debug mode only. So it is complaining about module dash core components has no attribute input. So if I go back to the documentation, it's capital input. Okay, so I need to give the capital I over here, save it, and then run it again. Everything goes fine. Then it will say like the server is running. So if I just go back here, it should automatically refresh, and if you see, it created a label with a text box with the initial value over here. Okay, so I just what I wanted to do is I will create another div over here. So whenever I write something over here, let's see if I write seed over here, so that div will have the value of seed over here as well. Okay, so for that, in the next line I will be creating a div. So for that, first I need to do a line break, and to do a line break, similar thing I will be doing it over here. I will search for an HTML component called line break, and that is nothing but html.br over here. Okay, so that will basically the br tag has been implemented as html.br over here. So this one, so that's my line break, and then I will just create a very simple div over here with an ID. So let's say ID equals to this one, output div over here. Okay, so this div will be updated when I'll be implementing my callback. So if I just see it now, you won't be able to see anything the div over here because we have not implemented the callback yet. So it will not update anything in the below, but it will be done eventually. Now, as I said in the beginning of this particular video, to understand callback, we need to understand how Python decorator works. So let's get a very brief idea about this one, a very simple example. So for that, I have just taken a sample file, Python file. We will just try to do some experiment on this one. So for that, I will just kill the server now. We will see it later. So this is just a very simple Python code we are trying to explain. So let's say I have a function called func1. It don't take any input, and inside that function 1 I have a simple print statement called hello from function func1 over here. Very simple print statement. Now if I just run this function 1, what will happen? So this will basically print this particular string over here in our standard output, correct? So let's kill this one. Let's try to run this guy over here. If you see, it is basically printing hello from function 1. Let's clear the screen. Okay, so now in Python the functions are actually first order object. That means just like numbers and string, you can pass them to another function as well as a parameter, but it passed the reference of that function. Okay, so to understand that, let's create another function called func2 over here, which basically takes an input. So let's say it takes another function as an input. So I just given a variable, the input parameter name something like this one, just to understand like it's basically taking a function as an input. Now inside that func2, I can call this particular function here, correct? Something like this one. So if I just save it, now if I just, instead of running the function 1, if I just run this guy over here, func2, just to take an example like how it works. So what should happen? So basically in the func2 we need to pass another function. So let's pass the func1 over here now. Okay, so we are passing the func1. If you see, I have not provided any brackets over here, so we are not calling the func1 over here. So what we are doing is basically we are passing the reference of this function into this function 2 over here, correct? So and inside the function 2 you are basically executing that function. Now while executing that, if you see, I have given these 2 brackets, correct? So ideally what should happen? It should print this line as well now. So let's do that. Let's see that. If you see, when I executed that, it is still printing the hello from function 1 over here. That means it is able to execute that function inside it, right? It's able to take that particular function as a parameter and able to execute it. Now what should happen if this particular function has an input? It can have any number of inputs over here, correct? Now before that, before we talk about this particular input, so let's talk about, we saw how to pass a function as a parameter to another function, right? Now as I said, just like any other first order object, so we can basically return a function as well from a particular function as well, right? So for that, and 2 concepts we'll be learning now. One is how to define a function inside the function and then return that particular function. Let's say something like this one. So let's say I write another function over here inside this func2 called a wrapper function. I just given the name so that in the future it will make sense why I have given the name something like this one, but for now there is no meaning for this one. So for inside the wrapper function, what I am doing is I am calling this guy over here, okay, because this guy anyway I am taking it as an input. So I am defining another function, wrapper function, inside this function 2, and then executing that function inside this function over here, okay. And then what I wanted to do is I want to return this wrapper function. As I said, you can take function as an input, you can always return as a function as an output as well, right? But this will always return the reference of that function. Now once I do that, what will happen when I run func2 of the func1? Now as this guy function 2 is returning a function over here, so when we try to execute it, we want to hold it in a variable, right? So let's create a variable called something like function1 only. Now there is specific reason behind this one, why I have chosen the variable name as function1, which we will see it very soon. But let's say we can take any variable name over here as instead of function1, but I choose this one because of some reason. Now if I just do that one, so this wrapper will be as a as returned as a function to this function 1, correct? So now if I just try to run this function 1, now this will be this guy will basically refer to this guy, the return function. So correct. So now what will happen, it should again print the same thing, hello from function 1, right? So if I do that, so it is basically printing the hello from function 1. But why we did that? We only have a single function, but we actually wrapped it in a multiple function and then returned something. Like, it does not make any sense, but it will make more sense. So let's say inside the wrapper function I just want to do something else. Let's say I want to print like the activities. You can perform some activities before calling func, or let's say another function, because that's the input, correct? So we can perform lot of activities, we can basically write some code, or we can take some action before basically calling this particular, executing this particular function. Also, after executing this function, we can perform some actions as well, correct? So now if we see closely, when we have a function called function 1 and there is a need that we do not want to change the function 1, but we want to perform some activities before executing the function 1 and some activities after executing the function 1. So what we can do is we can basically wrap in another function, then return that particular wrap function, correct? So now if I write and basically assign the same name over here, if you see it, I just always, from my code, I always want to use function 1, but inside Python I have written in such a way that it will also perform other activities as well. So if I run it now, what will happen? Let us see. So if I run it now, if you see, it's actually inside run the wrapper function. So that's why it has performed the activities before calling that function and after calling that function as well. Now instead of another function, let's make it beautiful. So let's format it in such a way that it will print the function name we have passed it over here, correct? So instead of another function, I will just format it with this input function over here, correct? So if I just run it now, it will basically print the function we have passed it over here. That's it. Okay, so if you are passing any other function, it will print that function and their corresponding reference as well. Now let us come back to this point where we were discussing about what if this particular function has an input, my function has an input. In that case, how it will handle that. So let's say I have an input called name. So let's use the name somewhere over here. So let's say hello, that particular name. So I'll just format the string over here, mat format, and there I'll be using name over here, correct? So now my function has an input. So how I can pass it over here, because over here I am passing it as a reference of that function, correct? So some way I need to tell this guy to handle this name as an input as well, correct? Because let's say I'll be calling this function as like this, correct? So if I execute this one now, so let's clear this screen now, and if I execute this one now, it will give me an error over here, because it will say like wrapper function takes 0 positional argument but 1 was given, correct? So I need to handle this one in my wrapper function only. So to handle this one, to handle any number of inputs, basically the normal inputs and as well as key value pairs, so we all know there are two arguments in Python called args and kwargs, correct? So that we'll be passing it over here. So we will be handling this situation with this one, args and kwargs. So in my function also I'll be passing this one as well. So whatever input, any number of input we are providing to this particular function, it should work now. So if I just execute it now, if you see, it is working as expected over here. Okay, so we understood a very important concept in Python, like how to use function as a parameter and return it as well, and as well as like if I just want to perform some action before or after executing a particular function without changing its code every time. Let's say I want to determine the execution time of any function. So instead of writing that code for each and every function, the similar code, I can write a wrapper of that particular function, okay, and then execute that particular timing, like timing calculation in that wrapper function before and after as well, so that I can get a execution time of that particular function, right? So that's the concept. So this concept is actually basically the basis of decorator in Python. So decorator means we decorate our home, right, with some things, right? So similar stuff, we decorate a function in Python. We do some more stuff, like here we are performing some activities before and after of that particular function, right? So that's the concept of decorator. Now if you see, like we have to do a lot of stuff over here, right, using this fung1, again passing this fung1 as an input, then calling this one. So instead of that, we can write it in a very simple, concise way. So we can write something like this one, @ func2. Okay, so @ is actually the decorator over here. Okay, it basically states the decorator and the name of the function, which will basically wrap the below function. So that's the way decorator works. So that means what essentially we are trying to say over here is, so there is a decorator exist basically for the function 1, which will basically make sure that this particular function will execute inside it, but it can do some other stuff over here as well. Okay, in that case I do not need this particular statement over here. So whenever I will be running the function 1, as function 1 has a decorator called function 2, so this guy will be getting called, and this will make sure this guy is actually executing as a part of its code. So if I just run now, and if you see, like when I am calling it, I am always calling as my function 1, because that's the thing I want to run from my code. It has a decorator, it will take care of its implementation automatically. So if I just run it now, so let's clear this prompt. And try to run it, and if you see, it do the same job over here. So this particular syntax is actually saving me writing this hairy syntax over here. Okay, so that's the concept of decorator over here, and that we will see in the plotly dash as well, like how it has been implemented. Now over there, another concept it's there is the inputs. So let's say, like decorator, we can pass some input as well over here. So let's say I want to execute this function n number of times in my wrapper function. So how I will do it? So let's say in my decorator I want to execute number of times. Let's say I have input called number of times called 2 over here. Okay, so I am passing an input over here. I want to execute this guy over here. Now you have to make sure like there is no gap between this line and the definition of the function over here. Okay, because they are actually related to each other. So now how I will implement this guy over here, number of times, because I cannot pass this guy over here. So in that case, what we'll have to do is you need to basically wrap it in another function. So let's say I will wrap it in def repeat, which will take an input called number of times. Okay, and which will wrap this whole function 2 over here. It will call the function 2 as part of it, and it will return the function 2. Similar way. return the function 2 over here. So that's it, but the decorator name has been changed now because we have wrapped everything in a repeat method. So I'll change the repeat over here. So that will be my decorator over here. So now inside this one I have to use this number of times. So here I will be using for I in range number of times. I will call this guy over here. So that I will make sure. Save it. So what will happen now? If I just call the function 1, it will check there is a repeat decorator over here, which basically returning this function 2. That means it will basically try to execute the function 2 with this input over here. So what is the input? Input is the function 1 over here, correct? So then it will basically execute, and when it comes to this particular line, it will use this particular number of times to execute this another function, basically the function 1 twice over here, this function 1 twice over here. So let's run this guy over here, and if you see it, after perform these activities before, it basically executed this particular function twice, and then the after activities over here. Okay, so that's how the decorator with input works over here. Now let's go back to our Plotly Dash. So in Plotly Dash, if you see, we have created this app over here, right? So here also we have a similar concept. So there is a decorator called Callback. So this is how we will be accessing that @app.callback. So this basically takes two inputs, an input object and another is the output object. So to pass that input object and the output object, what you need to do it over here is you need to basically import another libraries over here. So let me copy that. So this one, so from dash dependencies, you need to import this input and output. So this will basically make sure like whatever you are passing it over here, so that will pass as the input, and this will be basically tagged to the output over here. So we'll be passing something like this one for output. So this is the output object. So we will be passing some of the, let's say in our case we will be passing this div id, and we will see that first. So this is how we will be passing it basically, and input over here. So this is the object we need to create. What are the things we need to pass it over here? If you see, like the component id and the component property over here. So very simple structure. In both of these places, we need to pass which component you are referring to as an input and their corresponding property, and which component you will be updating as an output and their corresponding property, which property you are going to update over here. And if you have multiple input outputs, so you'll be passing multiple outputs as a array, multiple inputs as an array over here. Okay, so that's the difference. Now we will see that in future those examples as well over here. And each and every callback, or basically the decorator, has an particular method associated with it, right? Which, so let's say I will just create a method called update output div over here. Okay, we'll see that the implementation of it. Okay, so first we will try to see what will be our input and output. Our input will be the component. So there is a two input called component id. So what will be the component id? What will be our input? Our aim is to, whenever we write something over here in this text box, it should update the div below over here. That means the value of this text box over here. So what is the id of my text box? So that's why I have given this input id over here of my text box. So that's my component id. And what is the component property over here? So which property basically we are looking into? We're looking into the property of value over here, correct? So that is what will be my input. Now what will be my output over here? So let's do that. So what will be my component id? So let's copy this one from here. So what is my component ID? So what we want to update? We want to update my output div. So this is the one, I will pass it over here. And what I will update? So what will be my component property over here? Each and every div has a children property. So that's the thing we'll be update, right? We'll be updating over here. So that's my input and output structure. Very simple. And with what value I need to update? Now, it's a very simple rule of thumb you need to remember when you will be working with the dash callback. As I have single input, so in my method also I will have a single input over here. So let's say input value. I can give any name over here. And as I have single output, so I will be returning a single output over here as well. Okay, let's say output val over here. Now what will be the value of this output val? So let us fix that. So what will be the value of this output val? So what we are trying to achieve it? We are trying to achieve whatever we are writing it over here, same should come over here as well, correct? So let's format it in good way. So let's say we will try to display a string called output colon, then whatever I am passing it as a text box, correct? Dot format my input val over here. Save it. Okay, so this will be my output val, and that should update to this particular div over here. If you see, like just like we have discussed in our test.py, similar concept we have it over here as well, correct? So we have a decorator. We have a decorator called callback, which will make sure somewhere in its code it is running this particular method as well, and while it is running it, it will set this output as well properly. It will basically tag this input to this output. So whenever my input is changing, the output will be changing as well. So let us try to run this one and see if it is working properly or not. So if I see it now here, if you see, automatically when for the initial value, the output is automatically set to initial value. This is the div we have set it up over here, right? So now if I write something like this one, if you see, the output is automatically getting changed. Even I do not need to like press enter key or something. So this is nothing but the reactive programming, where your input and output are automatically tagged to each other, basically coupled to each other. So whenever input will be changing, the corresponding output will be changing as well. Okay, even in future videos we will see how to hold this one as well. Until unless we press some key, it should not change. But for now, this is the way it should work. The basic callback works in dash over here. Okay, so hopefully this video makes sense to you. See you in the next video.